think, for everyone in the press. I've been called a few things by the former president. You've been called the enemy of the people. And your role is just so absolutely indispensable to our democracy, and I just greatly appreciate everything you've done. And so it's an honor to sit down with you again. So nice to be back in Vroman's. Love this bookstore, and what a treat to be part of Pasadena LitFest again. Larry and I were reminiscing the last time I was here. The panel was called Politicians Who Read. And if you have a reprise of that in Congress, there'll be very few of us that can participate anymore. I was going to say, apparently it's all coke-filled orgies, according to one of my colleagues. I was racking my brain for a Voltaire quote, and I'm not sure this is Voltaire, so some of you have to fact check me, but it may have been Voltaire who said that God is a comedian playing to an audience that's too scared to laugh. And I guess probably about 3 years ago, the LA Times wrote a profile about me, and there had been a number of other profiles written by other newspapers, and I think they wanted to differentiate this profile. So they started it, the way they framed it was about my screenwriting. They thought, okay, this will be an interesting thing people don't know about Adam Schiff. And Trump must have read this or something, because immediately after that profile came out, he started attacking me as a failed screenwriter. And I thought, he doesn't know what a great compliment that is in Los Angeles. Half of my constituents are failed screenwriters. You know, my constituents are like, he's just like us. I'm not writing any screenplays these days, but I am thinking about a spy novel. I think the next thing I write is going to be more fun and less research involved. You better be writing this down. Please tell me that you're writing this down. You're at the center of things, and you better be writing this down. And I would always respond the same way by saying, when do I possibly have time to write any of this down? And then the pandemic hit, and I suddenly was at home and stuck at home and had time to write, and I thought, if I'm ever going to do it, I need to do it now. And my process was laborious, and I didn't realize at the outset, I knew it would be a lot of work. I'd never written a book before. But I thought, okay, I was there, I lived it, I won't have to do that much research. But that was a complete miscalculation. I had to do a lot of research for a variety of reasons. You know, for one thing, I needed to set the context of what was going on when I was experiencing what I was experiencing, and that went beyond my immediate view. But also, you can't completely trust what your recollection is. And so my process was to, when I started a chapter, to read through and replay all of my interviews at the time. And those interviews would lead me to other things that I would research. And watching an interview that I did at the time, and you know, we have a YouTube channel that we've kept up over the years, so I've got thousands of these interviews. It was like a video diary.
So that's like notes for you. So the notes that you didn't have time to take, they exist on YouTube.
Yes, I had some notes, my staff had some notes, but there was an extensive collection of what I was saying in real time. And the amazing thing is that when I would watch an interview that I was doing, it would bring me back to that moment. So I could, you know, watch an interview on Rachel Maddow and watch how I answered the question. And I would recognize I couldn't tell her this. I remember going into that interview and I wasn't allowed to say this, which is why I said it this way. And so when I went back to write it, I could obviously say a lot more than I could in real time. But the interviews really put me back, and it was a mixed blessing, I have to say. It was good as a writer to be able to do that. It was horrible to live through it again. Yeah. And the most painful part for me to write and relive was my daughter Alexa and her boyfriend Eric and a cousin of ours, Rafi, were here in Los Angeles visiting. And I took them to Amoeba Records in Hollywood. And I pull over the car and my phone starts exploding because Bill Barr has just released his false summary of the Mueller report. And I'm just getting blistered on Fox because they're accepting this as true. And I don't have the Mueller report. Nobody has it yet.
It was a Sunday morning, wasn't it?
That sounds right. Because our plan was to go hiking in Griffith Park after being at the record store. So I sent the kids into the record store and I said, I'll meet you inside. Of course, I never made it inside. And over the next 5 weeks, until Mueller did release his report, I felt like I was just completely twisting in the wind. Now, the moment the Mueller report came out, it was like, oh my God, Bill Barr is such a liar. He so materially and deliberately misrepresented what Mueller said in the report. It was really breathtaking. And then I could defend myself. I could point to the report. But for that period of time, it was just completely twisting in the wind. So reliving that stuff wasn't fun. But that was my method, was to watch the interviews, read the clips, do the research, take notes, review my own notes, find out if my staff had notes, find out if other people in the room had notes, and then start to write.
So that day whisked along, and you were told by Republican colleagues who were part of the madness against you, not exactly, I got your back, buddy, but don't show yourself. They, meaning their constituents, their fellow crazies, would go after you. So what kind of mixed emotions do you have when a colleague, is telling you, don't, I'll kind of put my coat over you, buddy?
A lot of mixed emotions. This was on January 6th. We're in the House chamber. The Capitol Police have come in initially to tell us there are rioters in the building, and then we need to get out of gas masks, then we need to get ready to get down on the ground, and then ultimately we needed to get out. And the minute they said you need to get out, there was a crush of people to get out the doors of the chamber. There was only one set of doors open. And I suddenly realized how many people were on the House floor, and I wondered where they all came from.
Because mid-pandemic, many of them without masks.
Yes, it was in January, so it was early pandemic. There was no vaccines. The vaccines had just come out, but most people didn't have them. And a lot of Republicans weren't wearing masks. And there was this scrum by the door to get out. And I felt, for whatever reason, I felt reasonably calm, whereas a lot of others didn't. And I was content to wait and let others go first. And I also didn't want to join the scrum of people with no masks on. I thought, I'm more likely to die from COVID than those lunatics out there. So I hung back, and a couple of Republicans, as the insurrectionists are battering the doors and windows, came up to me, and one of them said, "You can't let them see you." And the other says, "That's right. I know these people, I can talk to these people, I can talk my way through these people. You're in a whole different category." And at first I was kind of touched by their evident concern over my safety. But my immediate next reaction was, if you sons of bitches hadn't been lying about the election, I wouldn't need to be worried about my security, and no one would. And I remember walking out with one of the Republicans, and he had a pin on, so I knew he was a member, but I didn't recognize him. But it's a big place, and there are members in their first, second, and even third terms who I don't know yet. And so I said to him, "How long have you been here?" Meaning, how long have you been in Congress? As we're walking out the doors, here's a guy, he's carrying a wooden post in his hands. And the post had hand sanitizer on the top of it, because there were these posts at the entrance to the house where when you walked on, because of early COVID, you could clean your hands. And he ripped the thing out of the ground, and he was holding it like a club to defend himself. And I said, are you really that concerned about your safety? And he said, yes, I think I just heard gunshots. And he was right. I think that's when Ashley Babbitt was shot. And I said, how long have you been here? And he said, 72 hours. Oof. I said, 72 hours? He said, yes, I just got elected. So he was sworn in on January 3rd. This is January 6th. And I didn't know what to say to him. So I just looked at him in a total deadpan. I said, it's not always like this. Ooh, well, I know what I should say. Okay. I should say Rubio Canyon. But I think actually the trail that begins at the Stowe Canyon Nature Center in Burbank is probably my favorite trail.
We had a good time a couple months ago, didn't we? Hiking up on the Edison Trail up above Glendale.
Yeah,
That was a good hike. Your favorite LA taco?
You know, this is the problem is I'm vegan. So
Makes it hard, but
does
they've
make it
got
hard.
little
It does make it
cubes
hard.
of soy and stuff like that.
Yeah, I guess I would probably say, I don't know if they have tacos, but at a restaurant called Crossroads. It's a vegan place that has, it does have some Mexican food as well as lasagna and other stuff, and it's just, as a vegan, it's like paradise.
Favorite LA song?
Oh, well, I love LA.
Yeah,
Which probably is very politically incorrect.
Right, it is. You listen to all those lyrics. Favorite LA rock band?
Oh gosh. I would probably, I guess Van Halen?
Perfect in Pasadena. What comes to mind in your mind when I say the words "Open United States Senate Seat 2024"?
Well, what comes to mind? Possible.
Possible.
Ooh.
That's good. That's good news for modern man. What's the best thing about hanging on to a little tiny sliver of Pasadena in your district still?
Well, Vromans, even though you're not in my district, but Pasadena is such a jewel, and I'm glad that I get to represent even a part of it. And for whatever reason, I don't know why, the commission, the redistricting commission, took a bit of Pasadena away that I had and gave me a different part of Pasadena. And it was about the same amount in Pasadena, so I'm not sure why they did that.
I think Teresa's saying a little losing sort of the the Santa Fe area, but keeping Linda Vista, and then going maybe even across the Arroyo and a little bit of northwest Pasadena and the Rose Bowl.
Exactly. So I get the Rose Bowl.
The Rose Bowl.
I get the Rose Bowl.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. We're competing right now with the Cruel World rock concert down on the Brookside grounds. We are competing with the psychedelic tourists right now. You, Shifty Schiff, had a meeting in the Oval Office with the former guy. Can you take us there?
Sure. This was a completely surreal experience. It was early in the Russia investigation, so just to put you back in the time, the very first public hearing we did in the Russia investigation was with James Comey. He was our witness. Devin Nunes was the chair of the committee, so I was the ranking Democrat. So this was a hearing held by the Republicans at a time when the investigation was still bipartisan. This hearing was the end of that bipartisan short chapter of the investigation. Because during that hearing, for the first time, James Comey revealed to the country that not only had there been an investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails, which he had talked about openly even 3 days before the election, but there had been an investigation of Donald Trump and his campaign, which they had kept completely secret. But it involved potential collusion with the Russians, and that's what we were investigating. But the FBI was also investigating it. So this was a revelation for the country. Well, Donald Trump, watching from a few blocks away, was undoubtedly having a fit. And Nunes, the following night, I think as a way to compensate for this hearing that had gone, in his view, so horribly awry, gets out of a car in the middle of the night with a staff member, gets into an Uber and goes to an undisclosed location. And at this undisclosed location, he tells the press at a very high-profile press conference he holds on the White House grounds that he has received from a secret source information showing the Obama administration secretly spying on the Trump administration. Now, why would they do this? Because we would soon learn within a matter of days that the whole thing was a charade. That the secret location he'd gone to talk to the ostensible whistleblower was actually the White House. and that he had gone back to the White House to present the White House with what he got from the White House. Why do all that? Well, there were two answers. One was to change the subject from what James Comey had just told the country. But the other was, remember there was that insane tweet by Donald Trump that Obama was, had wiretapped Trump Tower. It was to justify that. They did so much in those 4 years to justify insane tweets. The president would tweet something utterly crazy, and they would then go have to try to make it true somehow. So Nunes had said at this press conference that he had obtained documents from this secret source that showed this Obama conspiracy. Nobody had seen them. He wouldn't even show them to the other Republican members of the committee. Now, they were being held at the White House, and I'm sitting in the bunker, which is what we affectionately call the Intelligence Committee space, 3 floors below the Capitol. And I have the TV on because Sean Spicer is doing a White House briefing. And normally I wouldn't watch that because it just, you couldn't watch too much of that. I suspected that the Midnight Run, which is what this episode had come to be called, of Devin Nunes, would be raised during the briefing, and sure enough it was. And one of the reporters says, what about the Midnight Run? And nobody's seen these documents. And Spicer says, well, we've invited Adam Schiff to come to the White House to see the documents. And I was like, you have? And we sent a message or an email or a fax to Adam Schiff today to invite me. You did? And one of my staff, like radar on MASH, walks in. I'm like, what invitation? This invitation. And they must have hit send right when he took the photo. And so I go to the White House to review the documents, and they're putting up a fuss about my bringing a staff member to see the documents. And one of the president's team comes into the meeting where I'm supposed to be looking at the documents and says the president wants to see you in the Oval Office, but he can't come, pointing to my staff. In other words, no witnesses. And of course this made me very uncomfortable. I didn't want to have a meeting about the Russia investigation with Donald Trump and then have him completely misrepresent what was said. And I argued with the president's staff for a while about having my staff, and basically said no. And then I thought, okay, if I don't go, then he's going to attack me for being unwilling to meet with him. So I went to the Oval Office, and I did my best to talk about anything other than the Russian investigation. But I walk into the Oval Office, he's sitting behind that resolute desk, and I can't help but think to myself, there's something so wrong with this picture. I mean, it's like a Mad Magazine cover. It just doesn't belong behind that desk. And he stands up, comes behind the desk, and comes over, shakes my hand. And the first thing he says to me is, you do a really good job. I think meaning on TV, which is what he really cares about. And but when somebody says to you, you do a really good job, just as a matter of human nature, you want to reply, well, so do you. I couldn't do it. And there was this kind of awkward pause. And then we started talking about infrastructure, ironically. It was always Infrastructure Week, if you remember. We had 4 years of Infrastructure Week with no infrastructure. But it was great. I was happy to talk about infrastructure, anything but Russia, so I'm saying, Mr. President.
Is he standing up? He's come around the desk? It's just the two? Who else is in the room?
Well, this is the thing. I thought it was just the two of us. He goes in back and sits down behind the desk. I sit in the chair in front of the desk. We're talking about infrastructure, and then we're talking about prescription drugs. And then he says something about Elijah Cummings, who has worked on prescription drugs, my late wonderful colleague. And he says, Elijah Cummings has a lot of nice things to say about me. And I'm thinking, I've never heard him say anything nice about you. But at the end of the conversation, he says, are you getting what you need, meaning these documents? And I said, no, as a matter of fact, your staff won't allow my staff director in to see the documents. He has all the same clearances he needs. And I don't review classified materials outside the presence of my staff. And the president says, well, I'm okay with it. I don't care if your staff see you. The whole committee can see it. And with this, I hear groaning behind me. I don't even think I knew there was anybody behind me. But there was a whole phalanx of, the president's chief of staff and others behind me, apparently. And the president picks up on the groaning, and he says, if they're okay with it, I'm okay with it. In case, of course, they weren't okay with it. But anyway, It was just so strange. Oh, I had one other, and I know we're running out of time, but I've got to tell you one other meeting with the president, which is when the Iranians downed an American drone. Trump was trying to figure out how to respond. And he invited the chairs of certain committees, the speaker, the Senate leader. So it was Pelosi and Schumer and McConnell and myself and about 5 other people. And then his cabinet. We were waiting on the speaker when Trump walked in. The speaker was delayed meeting one of the world leaders back in the Capitol. So Trump comes in, he sits down. I'm almost across from him at the table, a little bit kitty corner. But I'm the first person he sees when he looks across the table. And he just like physically blanched. I'm sure he was told that the chair of the Intel Committee had been invited, but he probably forgot who that was. Because he clearly wasn't expecting it. And the first thing he says is, I'm glad you're here. I said, I'm glad I'm here. And we started making small talk, and Mark Esper was nominated to be defense secretary, and Shanahan, the outgoing, both of them were there because one was outgoing, one was incoming. And I had known Esper for a long time. And he was not an ideological person, Esper. He didn't have the stature for that job, and so Trump walked all over him. But anyway, I said to the president, just make small talk. I've known Mark a long time, he's a good guy, I think he made a good choice, blah, blah, blah. And he didn't respond to this. But later in the meeting, he comes back to me, and he says, just how long have you known Esper? And I thought, oh shit, I've killed his nomination.
He was hanging out with the wrong kind of guy. January 6th hearings are all about.
Well,
It's something bigger.
it's a good question. A lot will determine on by what happens in November, whether we hold on to a majority or we don't. My greatest concern is that there were multiple lines of effort to overturn the last election. The attack on January 6th was merely the violent culmination of those efforts. It all began with the big lie, and the big lie started even before the election, when the former president was saying, there's going to be massive fraud, you can't trust absentee ballots, any ballot counted after election day, which he knew there would be many, and many would be Democratic, is inherently fraudulent, blah, blah, blah. But one of those lines of effort that might have succeeded was in the Congress itself, where Republicans voted, a majority of them, to overturn the election. Had Kevin McCarthy been the Speaker of the House in 2020, he would have overturned the election. Should the Republicans be in charge of the House in 2024, and Trump run and lose again, they will overturn the result. And I don't know where that leaves us. I thought that when Biden was elected president, we had really turned the corner as a country. I thought even more so after the horrors of January 6th, when the country got to see the terrible end to which Trump and Trumpism had brought us, that surely now they will repudiate Donald Trump and everything he stood for. But of course, they didn't. And they have doubled down on that big lie and used it to usher in a whole new generation of Jim Crow laws and other laws meant to undermine our democratic institutions. They've been running local meritocratic, technocratic elections officials out of town with death threats. And so I think that our democracy is more vulnerable today than it was a year ago. More vulnerable today than it was on January 6th. And so where are we headed? A lot depends on what happens in November. A lot depends on what happens 2 years from November. I hope that what I saw this morning outside the Pasadena City Hall and later in Los Angeles, as people were organizing around the Supreme Court opinion, is the beginning of what we saw 4 years ago. 4 years ago, there was this organic movement when Donald Trump was elected to reclaim our democracy, led by women. It began with the Million Moms March. And when I really knew that those midterms were going to be a phenomenal election was, I still remember where I was. I was on United Airlines flying back to DC. I was seated next to a woman I didn't know, and she looked over at me, recognized me, and she said, "I am part of an 11,000 woman strong group. We are lawyers, we are mothers, and we're pissed. And we're going to do something about it." And I thought we call ourselves law mamas. We're the law mamas. And I thought to myself, if 11,000 law mamas found each other online, completely organically, and organized themselves, something is really happening. And that something continued to happen from the 2 years from the inauguration until the midterms, and as a result, we had this incredible, massive wave, and it elected, I think, the best new class of Democratic representatives we've ever had. The Abigail Spanbergers, the Elaine Lurias, the Tom Malinowskis, the Katie Porters, the Mike Levins, people who become household names. The tragedy in 2020 is that we had every bit as good a class of new potential members in 2020, people who had likewise have become familiar to you all, but who got completely wiped out. People voted for Joe Biden, a lot of Republicans, moderate Republicans, independents, voted for Joe Biden because they despised Donald Trump, but it didn't make them Democrats. And as they traveled down the ballot, they reverted to form. And so our Democratic candidates end up getting wiped out. But we have another great class of people running in 2022. And if they're successful, it means we can do away with the filibuster, we can enshrine Roe into law, we can attack climate change, we can enshrine voting rights protections. We don't need to do that much. We need a couple more seats in the Senate, and we need to hold the House. That is a doable objective. And so a lot will depend on that. If we lose, the House is going to be a great illustration of the asylum taken over by the lunatics. Because the Marjorie Taylor Greens and the Matt Gaetzes and the Paul Gosars are going to be calling the shots. Because Kevin McCarthy is a really weak leader in every respect, but including in terms of the loyalty of his own members. Without those crazies, he doesn't control the majority. And so they will, and of course, the biggest crazy of all is the one down at Mar-a-Lago. He will do whatever Mar-a-Lago tells him to do. He will do whatever the Taylor Greens tell him to do, and the Lauren Boeberts. And I'll tell you, there are going to be a lot more of them who are winning Republican primaries for the House. So the kooks and crazy caucus in the GOP is going to be a lot bigger, whether they're in the majority or minority. So, it's going to be some fasten your seatbelts kind of days ahead.
Some hot fun in the old town tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Congressman Adam Schiff.
And Larry Wilson.
Congressman has agreed to stick around and sign some books.